where deep truths meet expansive awareness. Tonight's guest is the Manhattan Prophet, a voice for clarity in a chaotic world. As the host of the Manhattan Prophet podcast, he navigates the unraveling of illusions in our spiritual, social, and political lives. With piercing insight and unapologetic honesty, he calls us to see beyond the noise and reclaim our consciousness from systems that no longer serve us. This is not just a conversation, it's a wake up call. Welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mhm. So, Prophet, you speak of the unraveling of illusions. What illusions, social, spiritual, or economic, do you believe we are the most blind to right now?
Yeah, it's an important question, and I think that just to kind of back up a little bit and go into that, I think in a more eye-opening way. I think that people typically kind of go about their daily life without questioning or thinking kind of the why or the how um, they believe in something or they've adopted an ideology or they do something, and I think that the byproduct of that is you get a sort of corralled um, follower type mentality. Some people call it sheep, and what's happened is you have this kind of attitude as a mainstream way of living your life, right? And my effort really is to dig deep and understand the underlying forces behind living your life this way. Many people again just accept things as I call it divine, when in fact there have been intentional methods historically, systemically, to push society in one direction or another. And I'm not saying that this is sort of a great revelation, but I don't think people fully understand the impact that it has on, first and foremost, their consciousness, um, but also in really the underlying way that they're living their life, right? So things like religious orders of the past or economic systems that we currently live under have had a deep impact on the way people understand themselves and how they live their lives. And this transcends really family life, business practice, social interaction. It's really a pervasive issue. And although it's not necessarily as sexy as giving new methods of meditation or affirmation practices, which I do discuss and go into, um, I really look to expose the root of these ways of thinking and the way that we've accepted to live our lives, especially in the West.
Absolutely. So, what's the first step to recognizing we're even inside an illusion?
Right. So into the illusions, right? So for example, I think a good crucial first step is something that I touched on is asking kind of the why, right? Why is it that I've accepted to, and again, I think that this topic is super relevant, especially with Western civilizations, because the capitalist, profit over everything else mentality is so overt and is so in your face, yet it's it's so hidden, right? So when we talk about illusions, where people, one of the biggest issues is we have these systems in place, right? We have, again, religious, educational, etc. And what happens is people start identifying themselves with these systems, right? Which is a massive illusion, where my country, my religion, my job, my status. And what that does is it creates a massive schism, I believe, within the individual and their understanding of themselves. And it's quite toxic, because what that does is it disconnects people from their internal selves. It almost, in a way, makes it as if it doesn't exist, right? Because you're super focused on living your life in this survivalist kind of um, fear-based reality without questioning it, which is a massive illusion, right? So what I try to do again is I try to uncover the background to these systems where people can understand that where these illusions exist is not again just kind of the way life is, right? So uh, the way that, and it's hard to get people to do this, right? This isn't like a passive sort of easy effort. But the main way to do that is to kind of step back, step out outside of yourself and say, why am I doing this? Why do I believe this? Why is this way of living become tantamount to other ways of living? Why is it that I am willing to sacrifice, you know, 50 to 80 hours a week working during my precious daylight hours, sending my children to, education uh, systems and coming home and, seeing them for an hour or two and then rinse and repeating day in, day out. Now, this to me is sort of an obvious mechanism, not an inherent way to live your life. But these illusions, again, are masked by an underlying survivalist, fear-based way of living. So the illusions are pervasive, but it takes many efforts to get people to recognize these systems and how they've impacted our consciousness.
That unveiling that clarity begins with curiosity, not confrontation, is so needed today.
Yes, I agree with you. And there is a lack of curiosity. And I think that you bring up an important segment here, or rather connection here, which is that, and this is where kind of my worldview differs from the typical, I think, conspiracy theory person who thinks that, we live in this matrix and we're chained down and we are, being pushed or corralled outside of our control. I don't necessarily, I don't agree with that. I believe that these systems are mechanisms of control, but I believe that there is an individual component to living your life this way, where we have, to your point, we've eliminated that curiosity, and we have, in many ways, voluntarily accepted this way of life. And this exists with, social media, for example, where we are willing to exchange instant gratification for, deep introspection. We're willing to exchange curiosity for ignorance. We're willing to, and it's this willingness that we have to own. And I believe sincerely that consciousness requires a certain amount of responsibility over yourself, where it's important to do introspection and to think about your mentality, your mental state, and not just assume. And this way of living is not, is not foreign. I mean, if you look back to not even ancient civilizations, civilizations or groups of people or countries in the past, especially in the East, this is a typical way of life where people aren't just robotically living. They are taking a step back, and they are thinking, and they are curious, and they are looking to tap into higher levels of consciousness, or even just know themselves better. So there is a level of responsibility, and it certainly begins with curiosity.
Absolutely. So, you often talk about the evolution of consciousness. In a world so distracted, how can we truly begin that inward awakening without bypassing uncomfortable truths?
Again, another great question. I think that this is a multi-pronged effort, and I think that when you look at, spiritual gurus or people in the space that are looking to enhance or elevate consciousness or evolve consciously, there are many methods to this. There's, meditative practices, intentional ways of living, focusing on psychology and neuroscience with affirmations and manifestation type thinking. all of these things bring people closer to an evolved state of consciousness. And this is not about, in my opinion, and I kind of look at things on a macro level, right? Um, this is really about bringing a collective consciousness to an evolved state. And I talk about how we don't even look at evolution. And when we think about, oh, how does a society evolve? What are the metrics for measuring? What's the benchmark for measuring an evolved society? Um, People look to technological advancement, right? Or um, financial financial gain, if you will. But the point of evolution has and always should be measured by the state of the human being, not by what the human being produces. And this is to me not such a obvious measure. And you look at, especially in the West, the state of collective health, right? People have never been more ill, both physically and mentally. Well, why is that? Well, many industries, the food industry has been hijacked by corporations with lobbying efforts, and you see this massive exposure of late, especially with the new administration, where they show how artificial flavoring and wasn't removed by the FDA or other agencies that should have been overseeing these things, where there have been GMO based products that have been patented by petrochemical companies that that make up 80 to 90% of an entire agro product, from soybeans to corn, even wheat based products. And sure, it might be labeled, or sure, there might be a label on the food that says, oh, this is a genetically modified product, but that's kind of like the beginning of it, right? There's also health implications and mental implications. And anyway, so it's really about revealing all of these things that are going on. And I believe a crucial part of that, which is kind of what my effort focuses on, is identifying the fractured truth apparatus that we live under, where we have accepted truths that are not validated, or that are based on miscommunication or disinformation or misinformation, and our mainstream media sources are at fault, and our politicians are at fault, and there's no time to look into this this information, because, and again, this is a byproduct of the system. People are too distracted on their day-to-day, making money and getting to a place of financial status that they believe is tantamount to their existence and their evolution. So it's again, it's a multi-pronged effort, and I think that everybody in these individual spaces are all working towards the same goal, which is pushing the collective consciousness to an evolved state where people can see things more clearly and can see themselves more clearly, okay, and see the causes and effects that that exist in the modern era.
Makes sense. So, is pain sometimes the only thing that gets people to wake up?
So this is an interesting one, because I don't necessarily have the typical experience. You hear a lot of people who experienced some traumatic event, or they went on some retreat and there was a moment of awakening. And maybe this is a function of just kind of the general spark that it takes to ignite somebody, right? I personally, so it's hard for me to speak to other people, although I've heard stories. I personally have always had a curiosity to understand and to see the root cause, and to find the basis, the fundamental infrastructure of things. And I've always asked the questions why and how. I was, from a very young age, really interested in maybe weird topics, from philosophical topics to economic theory and political theory, and understanding why and how again. But the awakening, my awakening may not be typical, because I believe that it's sort of always been there in a strange way. But I think that people stumble upon awakening when they experience a traumatic event or a life-changing event, and they're looking for answers and reason. Sometimes it's again, it just sparks internally. Other times they'll seek answers, right, through either their religion or through spiritual endeavors. Again, retreats maybe, and something will light them off. But at the end of the day, back to the previous question, it's really about putting as many prongs on the fire, if you will, to try and spark and enlighten it. And I think that, and I don't believe that this is anything anybody would disagree with. I think that when people become more intentional and more aware and awaken, it improves society at large. On a general basis, and that's because at the core, when you really boil it down, and this is transcendent across the foundational tenets of monotheistic faith, Abrahamic faith, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism. When it really comes down to it, it's the immutable fact that we are all connected, right? There's all one source, and when we're finding this, even in modern day physics with quantum theory, and we're finding this that there's this quantum field that exists. And if you, it's sort of obvious, but if you can bring people to that understanding, to that awakening, that we are all part of the same field or consciousness, however you want to express it, I mean, wow, what a difference that would make in the way people live their lives.
That insight, that discomfort isn't punishment but a portal, is incredibly empowering.
It absolutely is. And this is really at the core, because I don't think that people in general see the inherent importance, and how empowering it can be. And I believe that there are, again, many fields in the psychology or the psychological, especially in the neuroscience areas, where you kind of get a taste of that, right? Where when you go down these paths and you live with intention and you understand that, you are not your emotions, you are not your thoughts, that you exist outside of those things. What an empowering way to live, right? To say, look, I have control over my consciousness. I don't care what my unconsciousness is. I have power over my consciousness, and I can even impact my subconsciousness. And here are real ways of doing that, right? I mean, that to me is, what's more powerful than that? To be given the tools to be what we are all really meant to be, which are creators. We are here to create a reality that's our own, and we are able to do that by living with intention, and we were able to come to that realization again through all of these different efforts. So yes, it's incredibly empowering.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, what role does personal accountability play in collective awakening? Like, can a society evolve if individuals stay asleep?
I don't believe that a society can evolve with individuals staying asleep, and I think that, speaking to the fractured collective truth apparatus, you have you have real systems in place that suppress information. You have real interests that exist, especially within the capitalist structure, that are suppressing knowledge, that are suppressing information. And again, this method goes back thousands of years, um, where people are kept asleep to corral power, right? You see, just touching briefly, the United States specifically is, I guess, categorized as a Christian country, right? When you go back to the origin of Christianity, the first sect being Catholicism and the Roman Catholic Church, um, there was an intentional method employed to, well, first of all, eradicate any other belief systems, right? Where you had the Dark Ages, you had the Inquisition, You had there's just been there's so many documented uh, times when this took place, especially in the ages of enlightenment, where there was a suppression of information and knowledge, and society, which is this is actually crazy, but factual. The church, which is supposed to be a again a bridge to enlightenment, a bridge to reaching a higher level of spirituality, to touching on your higher self, in documented form, cut off sort of the feminine construct or the right brained way of living and seeing the world. This was, you know, just overtly documented with the suppression of Rosicrucianism, with the Enlightenment in the Czech Republic, um, with the way that the patriarchal system was structured. And it's not just in Catholicism; it was in Judaism as well, where the Deuteronomists removed, the sacred feminine and pushed this patriarchy, and with agricultural development and with empires being built, that was the course that civilization was set on, right? People don't know this. They think that, oh, this is just the way it is. It's natural that in all these religions, it's just men who are ruling, or men who are the gatekeepers to God, this externalized version of God, right? I mean, there was a systematic effort to remove the the God force, the source, the spirit from the individual, externalize it, and to push society into a externalized sense of self, into a consumer based way of thinking, into a material way of viewing science. Again, all documented. So people are not aware of that. And if you're not aware of that, how are you going to wake up? How are you going to say to yourself, okay, look, I go to church, or I go to temple, or I go to the mosque. This is me being spiritual. This is me being, tapping into a higher state. When in fact, in practice, it's really doing the reverse. It's putting a blockade there. Now, for me to say this, which I know to be definitively true, this is an offensive way of looking at religion. This is an offensive way of understanding yourself. But at the end of the day, the fundamental teachings, even of Jesus, when you go to the Nag Hammadi texts that were found in Upper Egypt, right, which were hidden by monks, if you read what he said then, or what was recorded that he said then, well, if you um, if you don't reveal what is inside of you, then what is inside of you will end up destroying you, right? There was this massive mystical understanding that was suppressed. That's really what Christianity is supposed to be about. That's really what Judaism is supposed to be about. It's not about um, having an institutionalized, right brain way of viewing yourself in the world and your connection to God. It's about um, understanding that there's a need for a balance between the two. And when you remove an entire side of your being, not just from a spiritual side, but from a way you live your life and the way economies are structured, the way that education is structured, you keep a population asleep, right? So it's that was a long answer. I apologize, but it's crucial and essential, really, to have a population wake up in order for civilization to evolve consciously.
Absolutely. So, where do you see resistance showing up the most when people are called to change?
Let me ask you a question. When you say call to change, can you qualify that a little bit more for me? Sorry about that. I think that the part that they resist the most is really at the onset, because you're asking somebody quite literally. And this is why education and indoctrination is so crucial, especially at a younger age, in the way that we educate our youth, because they are the bearer of the torch, if you will, right? And how society will evolve. But when you say to somebody, look, the way that you're living your life in many ways is reversed, is the opposite of how you should be thinking about things. I mean, to say that to somebody is such a are you crazy or a wow moment. It's really you're cutting at the core of somebody's beliefs about themselves, about the world that they live in. So that onset of understanding or that recognition to get over that hurdle is requires so much um, that I think if you're not open minded and you're not curious, like you said before, and you're not willing to ask the questions, I think that that's where the discourse ends. If you're asking somebody to question, and then that questioning naturally leads you down the path of, oh, there has to be a reformation, or there has to be a way to recalibrate my sense of self, my way of life. Oh, and then by the way, that recalibration, that reformation runs counter to the society in which I live, in which I'm raising my children. How do you reconcile that? How are you willing to make that leap? It takes a brave person. It takes somebody willing to say to themselves, I might not know everything. I may not have been guided down that right path. And quite frankly, there are consequences, real, tangible consequences to coming to those realizations and making the necessary changes that impact you in a way that allows you to evolve consciously. So to me, that initial, feed of information, or that initial even, brink of experience to a higher state, I think can be very, very imposing and can be very, very scary to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And that tension that we want freedom without responsibility is a mirror we all must face.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that a big component, especially of the way that systems are structured, is you're really corralled and you're really put into this bottleneck. And as long as you follow the rules, and as long as you go about your life in the way that it's been scripted, and you know that you can make a certain amount of money and live your life a certain way, you can buy the things that you want to buy, et cetera, et cetera. This again to me is perceived freedom. This is not real freedom. If you are obligated again to sacrifice, let's call it 50% of your life, of your waking hours, working, you're not, you're not, many people, I'd say most people aren't living to work. They're working to live. But that's not freedom. That's maybe you're able to buy a larger house or drive a fancier car, or I don't know, you can afford to go out to restaurants, or whatever sort of material uh hierarchy you're looking to work off of. This is not freedom. And to accomplish real freedom again is to find a balance. It's to say, look, I can value having nice things, but those nice things don't supersede a balanced way of living and a proper way of understanding myself. And that to me is where true freedom exists, where you can separate your identity from the structure, where you can say, look, I can look internally and I can see that there's something more there. That freedom, acquiring that freedom, takes responsibility. And it's a leap, again, that most people are not willing to take. It's much easier, even if it causes, pain of not sleeping as much, not seeing your family as much, whatever external pain you're experiencing, that is much easier to digest than taking on the responsibility of recognizing that there's something more out there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So the Manhattan Prophet doesn't just speak, he deconstructs, disrupts, and reorients us towards truth. In a world flooded with noise, his voice is a compass. So here's your spark. Truth is not always comfortable, but it will always set you free. Start by seeing, start by questioning, start by remembering.